Marcus Chen pressed his face against the observation deck's reinforced glass, watching the massive crimson shapes soar through the alien sky below. The draconian ships moved with impossible grace, their wing-like extensions catching the light of 3 suns. At 17, he was the youngest human aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony, and certainly the least important. "Get away from there." "Orphan," sneered Ambassador Richardson, straightening his formal robes. "The Draconians don't need to see some charity case gawking at them like a tourist." Marcus stepped back, his jaw clenched. The other diplomats treated him like furniture, useful only for carrying bags and running errands. They'd brought him along because regulations required a cultural attaché, and he was cheap labor with a decent education. Nobody expected him to actually contribute to the most important first contact in human history. The Draconians had contacted Earth 6 months ago with a simple message: "Prove your species worthy of joining the Galactic Council, or remain forever isolated." They'd invited humanity to send representatives to their homeworld of Pyraxis, where the final test would take place. Nobody knew what this test involved, but failure meant Earth would be cut off from the galaxy's advanced civilizations. Captain Reeves announced over the intercom that they were beginning final approach. Through the viewing port, Marcus could see Pyraxis growing larger, a world of floating islands connected by streams of energy. Massive dragon-like creatures with technological augmentations flew between crystalline cities that defied gravity. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The landing was smooth, though the artificial gravity felt heavier than Earth normal. As they disembarked, Marcus shouldered his pack and followed the delegation down the ramp. The spaceport was carved from what looked like a single enormous gemstone, with corridors that twisted in impossible directions. Their draconian guide was impressive even by his species' standards. Standing 12 feet tall with scales that shifted from deep blue to silver, he wore integrated armor that seemed to grow from his hide. His name was Vorthak, and he spoke perfect English through a translation device embedded in his throat. "Welcome, humans," Vorthak rumbled, his voice like controlled thunder. "I am War Speaker of the 5th Talon. You will be taken to the testing grounds where your worthiness will be measured." Ambassador Richardson puffed out his chest importantly. "We're honored by this opportunity. I'm sure our species will prove itself admirably." Vorthak's golden eyes fixed on the ambassador with what might have been amusement. "Yes, we shall see." His gaze swept over the delegation and lingered on Marcus for just a moment longer than the others. "The testing begins at dawn. Tonight you rest." Their quarters were luxurious by human standards, though clearly designed for much larger occupants. Marcus found himself in a small alcove, while the senior diplomats enjoyed spacious chambers. He didn't mind. The curved walls were transparent, offering an incredible view of the floating city beyond. As night fell, Marcus watched the Draconians go about their evening routines. Young ones played aerial games between the platforms while adults conducted what looked like important business in the glowing spires. There was something hauntingly familiar about their social structure, though he couldn't quite place what it was. A soft chime indicated someone was at his door. Marcus opened it to find a young Draconian, perhaps 8 feet tall with bright green scales. She wore simple robes and carried a data tablet. "I am Zareth, student of Xenology," she said in halting English. "I study human behaviors. May I ask you questions?" Marcus glanced around nervously. The senior diplomats would probably be furious if they knew he was speaking with a Draconian without supervision. But something in her earnest expression reminded him of his younger self, always asking questions that adults found annoying. "Sure," he said, stepping back to let her in. For the next 2 hours, they talked. Zareth was curious about human family structures, particularly fascinated by the concept of adoption and foster care. Marcus found himself telling her about growing up in the system, bouncing between homes, never quite belonging anywhere. "This is strange to us," Zareth admitted. "Draconian young who lose their birth clan are discarded. We do not understand how humans can accept outsiders as family." "Sometimes they can't," Marcus said quietly. "Sometimes you spend your whole life proving you belong somewhere." Zareth tilted her massive head thoughtfully. "Perhaps this is why the Council sent for humans. We need to understand this. Flexibility." Before she left, she touched his shoulder gently with one clawed hand. "The testing tomorrow will be dangerous. Our elders believe humans are too weak to survive it. I hope you prove them wrong. After she was gone, Marcus lay on his sleeping platform staring out at the alien stars. He'd spent his life being overlooked, dismissed, pushed aside. Tomorrow his entire species would face judgment and he was just along for the ride. But something Zareth had said stuck with him. Maybe being different wasn't always a weakness. Maybe sometimes it was exactly what you needed to survive. Dawn on Pyraxis painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Marcus woke to find the senior diplomats already gathered in the common area, reviewing their notes and practicing formal speeches. Ambassador Richardson was particularly agitated, pacing back and forth while muttering about proper protocols. Remember, he told the group, we represent all of humanity today. Every word, every gesture will be scrutinized. We cannot afford any mistakes. Dr. Sarah Collins, the mission's chief scientist, looked up from her tablet. Do we have any idea what this test actually involves? Combat, most likely, replied General Morrison, the military attaché. Every species in the Galactic Council had to prove their martial prowess. The Draconians respect strength above all else. Marcus quietly ate his breakfast ration while listening to their speculation. None of them seemed particularly concerned about including him in their strategies. He was invisible as usual. Just the orphan boy they'd dragged along because regulations said they needed a cultural specialist under 30. Vorthak arrived precisely at sunrise, flanked by two other Draconians whose scales bore intricate tattoos marking them as high-ranking warriors. The War Speaker's armor gleamed in the morning light, and Marcus noticed new additions, weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. It is time, Vorthak announced. Follow. They were led through corridors that seemed to shift and change as they walked, the crystalline walls displaying flowing patterns that hurt to look at directly. Eventually, they emerged onto a vast platform suspended high above the city. Other platforms floated nearby, connected by bridges of solid light. The testing ground was unlike anything Marcus had imagined. It wasn't an arena or battlefield, but something far more complex. Floating obstacles formed a three-dimensional maze that stretched upward into the clouds. Energy barriers flickered on and off in random patterns, while mechanical guardians patrolled predetermined routes. But what caught Marcus's attention were the creatures perched on platforms throughout the maze. They looked like smaller versions of the Draconians, but wild and untamed. Their scales were darker, almost black, and their eyes held a feral intelligence that spoke of untold generations living free. Behold the shadow worms, Vorthak said with obvious pride. The untamed children of our ancient bloodline. They serve no master, bow to no authority. For 10,000 years, no outsider has successfully bonded with a shadow worm. Ambassador Richardson cleared his throat importantly. And our test involves these creatures? Your test, Vorthak replied, is to navigate the maze and reach the summit platform. Along the way, you will encounter 3 challenges designed to measure your species' adaptability, courage, and wisdom. Complete all 3, and humanity joins the Galactic Council with full privileges. And if we fail? Dr. Collins asked. Vorthak's expression grew grave. Then your species remains isolated for another 1,000 years, until you have evolved sufficiently to try again. The War Speaker gestured to the maze. You may work together or separately as you choose. There are no restrictions on methods or tactics. The test begins when you step onto the first platform. Marcus watched the senior diplomats huddle together, forming their strategy. General Morrison wanted to take point, using his military training to scout ahead. Dr. Collins suggested they analyze the energy patterns before moving. Ambassador Richardson insisted they maintain dignity and protocol throughout the ordeal. None of them asked for his input. I'll just stay back and observe, Marcus offered. But they were already moving toward the starting platform. As they prepared to enter the maze, Marcus noticed something the others had missed. One of the shadow worms was watching them with unusual interest. Unlike the others, which seemed focused on their own concerns, this one kept its attention fixed on the human delegation. Its scales were pure black except for silver markings around its eyes, and it was noticeably smaller than the others. The creature's gaze met his for a moment, and Marcus felt a strange recognition pass between them. Like looking into a dark mirror, he saw something familiar in its isolation. This shadow worm was different from the others, set apart somehow. An outsider in its own family. The first challenge came quickly. A series of energy barriers blocked their path. shifting too rapidly to predict. General Morrison attempted to time the patterns, but the barriers seemed to respond to his movements, making passage impossible through traditional means. "There's no pattern," Dr. Collins announced after several minutes of observation. "The barriers are reacting to our approach." Ambassador Richardson was growing frustrated. "This is impossible. How are we supposed to proceed?" Marcus watched from the rear, noticing something the others had missed. The energy barriers weren't truly random. They responded to intention and aggression. When General Morrison approached with military determination, they became more solid and dangerous. When Dr. Collins tried to analyze them clinically, they shifted to block her scanning equipment. But when Marcus accidentally stumbled near one while trying to stay out of the way, it flickered and dimmed slightly. "What if we're thinking about this wrong?" Marcus suggested quietly. The senior diplomats turned to him with expressions ranging from annoyance to mild interest. "The barriers respond to how we approach them," he continued, his voice gaining confidence. "Maybe the challenge isn't about overcoming them, but about understanding them." "That's absurd," General Morrison snapped. "They're defensive systems. You defeat them through superior tactics and firepower." But Dr. Collins looked thoughtful. "Actually, the readings are different when Marcus is near them. Less aggressive somehow." Marcus took a deep breath and approached the nearest barrier. Instead of trying to analyze it or find a way through it, he simply acknowledged its presence. The energy field shimmered and began to thin. "I'm not here to fight you," he said softly to the barrier. "I just need to pass through." "Is that okay?" The barrier dissolved completely. Behind him, the diplomatic team stared in shock as Marcus walked calmly through the gap he'd created. After a moment's hesitation, they followed, finding that the barriers remained inactive as long as they didn't approach with hostile intent. "Remarkable," Dr. Collins murmured. "It's responding to emotional state, not just physical presence." As they progressed deeper into the maze, Marcus began to understand something important about the test. It wasn't measuring their ability to conquer or dominate, but their capacity to adapt and coexist. The Draconians weren't looking for warriors, they were looking for partners. The second challenge appeared as they climbed higher into the maze. The path split into 5 different routes, each leading through what looked like identical passages carved from crystalline stone. But as they approached, Marcus could feel the differences between them, subtle variations in temperature, air pressure, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "We should split up," General Morrison declared. "Cover more ground, increase our chances of finding the correct path." "Absolutely not," Ambassador Richardson countered. "We stay together and present a unified front. That's what diplomatic protocols dictate." Dr. Collins was already scanning the passages with her equipment. "I'm getting strange readings from all of them. Some kind of quantum fluctuation that's interfering with my sensors." While they argued, Marcus walked closer to the passages and closed his eyes, trying to sense what made each one different. The first felt cold and unwelcoming, like walking into a tomb. The second hummed with aggressive energy that made his teeth ache. The third seemed to pull at him, but not in a good way, more like quicksand drawing its victims down. The fourth passage felt empty, sterile, offering nothing but endless wandering. But the fifth felt alive, not threatening but aware, like stepping into someone's home where you were neither welcomed nor rejected, simply acknowledged as a visitor who might prove interesting. "This one," Marcus said, pointing to the 5th passage. "Based on what evidence?" General Morrison demanded. Marcus struggled to explain. "It feels right, like it's waiting for us to make a choice, not trying to trick us into the wrong one." "Feelings aren't data," Dr. Collins observed, though her tone was less dismissive than curious. "But my instruments can't penetrate whatever's blocking these passages anyway." Ambassador Richardson looked between the 5 options with obvious frustration. "We can't afford to guess randomly." "It's not random," Marcus insisted. "The first challenge was about understanding instead of fighting. Maybe this one is about trusting intuition instead of overthinking." Before anyone could stop him, Marcus walked into the 5th passage. For a moment, the walls seemed to close around him, and he wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. Then the crystalline surfaces began to glow with soft light, illuminating a path that led steadily upward. The others followed reluctantly, with General Morrison muttering about the dangers of following untested hunches. But as they progressed through the passage, it became clear that Marcus had chosen correctly. The walls displayed images of draconian history, not just their conquests and achievements, but their failures and struggles, their moments of doubt and growth. "It's a teaching gallery," Dr. Collins breathed, recording everything she could. "They're showing us their vulnerable moments, their mistakes." One image particularly caught Marcus's attention. It showed a young draconian, smaller than the others, being cast out from a group. The next image showed the same individual years later, standing before a council of elders, no longer an outcast but someone who had found their own path to significance. "They understand isolation too," Marcus murmured. The passage opened onto another platform where the third challenge awaited. This time it wasn't a puzzle or obstacle course, but a single draconian warrior standing at the center of a circular arena. The warrior was massive, even by draconian standards, with scarred scales and weapons that looked capable of melting steel. "I am Korath the Unbending," the warrior announced, his voice echoing across the platform. "For this final challenge, one among you must face me in single combat. Choose your champion." The diplomatic team exchanged alarmed glances. This was exactly what General Morrison had predicted, but none of them were prepared for actual combat against a 12-foot-tall dragon warrior. "I'll do it." General Morrison stepped forward, his hand moving to the sidearm at his belt. "Wait," Marcus said, something nagging at his mind. "Look at his stance, his expression. He's not preparing to fight. He's waiting." "Of course he's waiting," Ambassador Richardson snapped. "He's waiting for us to choose a champion so he can demonstrate draconian superiority." But Marcus was studying Korath more carefully. The warrior's weapons were sheathed. His posture was formal but not aggressive, and his eyes held the same patient intelligence Marcus had seen in Vorthak and Zarath. "What if this isn't about fighting either?" Marcus asked. "What if it's another test of understanding?" He walked toward Korath, ignoring the shouts of alarm from the others. As he approached, the massive warrior's expression shifted slightly, showing what might have been approval. "I don't think you want to fight us," Marcus said when he was close enough to speak normally. "I think you want to see if we're wise enough not to fight you." Korath's scarred features split into what was unmistakably a grin. "You begin to understand, small human. Combat proves only who is stronger in this moment. Wisdom proves who will survive in the long term." The warrior stepped aside, gesturing toward a doorway that had appeared in the platform's far wall. "Your species shows promise. Complete the maze and face the final judgment of the council." As they passed through the doorway, Marcus caught Korath's eye. "Thank you for the lesson. Thank your own wisdom, young one. You saw what others could not because you have learned to look beyond surface appearances." The final section of the maze was different from everything that had come before. Instead of challenges or puzzles, it was simply a long spiraling path that led upward through clouds of glittering mist. As they climbed, Marcus found himself separated from the others by the thick fog. He wasn't afraid, though. Something told him this was meant to happen, that the final approach had to be made individually. Each person would face whatever waited at the summit in their own way. The path ended at a platform suspended impossibly high above the city. 7 draconians waited there, arranged in a formal council formation. Their scales showed the deep colors and intricate patterns of extreme age and wisdom. These were the beings who would decide humanity's fate, but Marcus barely noticed them. His attention was fixed on the shadow worm perched on the platform's edge, the same one that had been watching him earlier. Up close he could see that it wasn't just smaller than the others, but younger. Its silver markings were still developing, and there was something almost tentative in the way it held itself. The shadow worm looked at him with eyes that held a loneliness he recognized from his own mirror. The other members of the diplomatic team emerged from the mist one by one, each looking dazed by their individual journey through the final ascent. Ambassador Richardson straightened his robes and immediately began preparing what Marcus suspected would be a formal speech. General Morrison scanned the platform for potential threats, his military training never fully at rest. Dr. Collins was already taking readings on everything she could see, but Marcus remained focused on the young shadow worm. There was something heartbreaking about the way it sat apart from even the other wild dragons, as if it didn't belong anywhere in this ancient hierarchy. The eldest of the council dragons, whose scales had faded to deep silver with age, spoke in a voice like distant thunder. "I am Elder Thanevar, first speaker of the High Council. You have completed the trials of understanding. showing wisdom beyond what we expected from such a young species. Ambassador Richardson stepped forward with obvious relief. "We're honored by your recognition, Elder. I'm prepared to discuss the terms of humanity's membership in the Galactic Council." Elder Thainvar's massive head tilted slightly, a gesture Marcus was beginning to recognize as amusement. "Terms? You misunderstand the nature of what has transpired here." The Elder's gaze swept over the human delegation and settled on Marcus. "The trials were not pass-or-fail examinations, young humans. They were opportunities for us to observe how your species thinks, how you solve problems, how you relate to others different from yourselves." Another council member, this one with deep blue scales marked by white scars, spoke up. "We have watched countless species attempt these same challenges. Most approach them as conquest to be achieved through force or intellect alone. Few understand that they are conversations to be had." "Conversations?" Dr. Collins asked, her scientific curiosity overriding protocol. "Indeed," the scarred dragon replied. "The energy barriers were not obstacles but minds to be communicated with. The maze passages were not puzzles but choices about how you perceive others. Korath was not an enemy but a teacher waiting to see if you could recognize wisdom over violence." Marcus felt a growing understanding of what they were really being told. "You weren't testing our strength. You were testing our ability to connect with things that seem alien to us." "Precisely," Elder Thainvar confirmed. "And while your companions showed progress, you demonstrated something far more valuable. You showed the capacity to see beyond appearances and find common ground with the truly other." The Elder gestured toward the young shadow worm, which had been listening to the conversation with obvious intelligence. "This is Nyxaria, youngest of the shadow worm bloodline. She has never bonded with any being, draconian or otherwise. Her kind are born wild and remain wild, accepting no authority, forming no lasting connections." Marcus looked more closely at Nyxaria and saw his own story reflected in her isolation. "She's alone, isn't she? Even among her own kind. The shadow worms follow no leaders, acknowledge no hierarchy," explained another council member. "They are individuals in the truest sense, which makes them both free and eternally alone. Nyxaria is the youngest and smallest of her generation, often overlooked by the others." Ambassador Richardson was growing visibly frustrated with the philosophical turn of the conversation. "With respect, Elder, how does this relate to humanity's application for council membership?" Elder Thainvar's attention never wavered from Marcus. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Council has operated under the principle that advanced species must prove their dominance over others. We have accepted members based on their ability to conquer, to impose their will, to demonstrate superiority. The Elder's voice grew thoughtful. "But this approach has created a galaxy of competitors, not collaborators. Species that join the Council often become isolated within it, maintaining their positions through strength rather than building genuine relationships." "You're saying the system is broken?" Marcus realized. "We are saying it is incomplete," the scarred council member corrected. "We need members who can bridge differences, who can find connections where others see only obstacles. We need partners, not just allies." Dr. Collins looked puzzled. "But surely there have been other species with these qualities." "Few," Elder Thainvar admitted. "Most advanced species achieve their development through competition and conquest. Those with more cooperative natures rarely survive long enough to reach the stars." "Humans are different?" General Morrison asked skeptically. "Humans are contradictory," another council member observed with what sounded like approval. "You compete fiercely, yet you also adopt strangers as family. You wage war, yet you also show mercy to defeated enemies. You create hierarchies, yet you also elevate those who were once outcasts." Marcus felt all eyes turning to him as the full implications became clear. He wasn't just an orphan they'd brought along for regulations, he was living proof of humanity's most unusual characteristic. "You're not just testing whether we're strong enough to join the council," he said slowly. "You're testing whether we might help change what the council becomes." Elder Thainvar's approval was unmistakable now. The galaxy faces challenges that cannot be solved through dominance alone. We need species that understand cooperation, that can form genuine bonds across vast differences. The Elder gestured again toward Nyxaria, who had been moving closer during the conversation. Drawn by some instinct she probably didn't understand herself. "Which brings us to the final question." Elder Thanevar continued. Membership in the Council requires each species to demonstrate their unique contribution to galactic civilization. Some bring advanced technology. Others bring strategic resources. Still others bring military might. Marcus's heart began to race as he sensed where this was leading. Humanity's contribution, should you choose to make it, would be your gift for connection across differences. But gifts must be demonstrated, not simply claimed. Nyxaria was now close enough that Marcus could see the individual scales on her elegant neck, each one catching the light differently. Her eyes held an intelligence that was utterly alien yet somehow familiar, the look of someone who had always been searching for something they couldn't name. She's never bonded with anyone, Marcus said quietly. Never, Elder Thanevar confirmed. Shadow worms bond only when they recognize something in another being that resonates with their deepest nature. It cannot be forced, bought, or manipulated. It either exists or it does not. Marcus understood now why he was really here, why the Draconians had been watching him specifically throughout the trials. This wasn't about diplomatic protocol or cultural expertise. This was about proving that humans could form connections that transcended every boundary of species, culture, and understanding. It was about proving that an orphan boy who had never belonged anywhere might be exactly what the galaxy needed. The platform fell silent except for the whisper of wind through the crystalline structures below. Marcus could feel the weight of expectation from the council dragons, the confusion and growing anxiety from his fellow humans, and something else, a sense of anticipation from Nyxaria herself. The young shadow worm had moved even closer, now within arm's reach if he dared to extend his hand. Her scales were beautiful up close, deep black with those silver markings that seemed to shift and flow like liquid starlight. But it was her eyes that held him, ancient and young at the same time, carrying the weight of genetic memory from thousands of generations of wild dragons. I don't understand, Ambassador Richardson said, his diplomatic composure finally cracking. Are you saying this boy is supposed to tame one of these creatures? Tame? Elder Thanevar's voice carried a note of sharp disapproval. You still think in terms of dominance and submission. A shadow worm cannot be tamed any more than a star can be caged. They can only be understood, respected, and if the bond is true, partnered with. But he's just a kid, General Morrison protested. No offense, Marcus, but you've never even owned a pet, let alone dealt with something like this. Marcus almost smiled at that. Morrison was right. He'd never been allowed pets in most of the foster homes. Too much responsibility, too much mess, too expensive. Just another reminder that he was temporary, not really part of the family. Maybe that's exactly why I might understand her, Marcus said quietly, his eyes never leaving Nyxaria's. I know what it's like to not belong anywhere. Dr. Collins was studying her scanner readings with growing excitement. The quantum resonance patterns are incredible. There's definitely some kind of communication happening here, but it's not based on language or even traditional telepathy. It's more like emotional harmonics. Nyxaria made a sound then, low and musical, unlike anything Marcus had heard from the larger Draconians. It wasn't quite a purr, not exactly a song, but something that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to something deeper in his mind. The sound carried loneliness, yes, but also hope, recognition, a question without words. Are you like me? Marcus took a step closer, moving slowly so as not to startle her. I think I am like you, he said softly. I've been alone most of my life too. Always on the outside, watching everyone else belong to families, to groups, to places where they fit. The shadow worm's head tilted, and Marcus could swear he saw understanding in her alien features. But maybe, he continued, being alone taught us something important. Maybe it taught us how to recognize others who don't fit, how to make space for the ones who get left behind. Nyxaria moved closer still, close enough that Marcus could feel the warmth radiating from her scales. She was smaller than the adult Draconians, probably only about 8 feet long, but her presence felt immense. There was power there, carefully controlled but undeniably real. The council speaks of bonding, Marcus said, raising his voice slightly so the others could hear. But what they're really talking about is family, isn't it? Not the kind you're born into, but the kind you choose. The kind that chooses you back. Elder Thanevar's approval was palpable. You begin to understand the true nature of what we offer, young human. Not membership in an organization, but inclusion in something far more precious, a family that spans the stars. Marcus extended his hand slowly, palm up, offering Nyxaria the choice to make contact or not. She studied his hand for a long moment, then gently pressed her snout against his palm. The contact sent a shock through him, not painful but overwhelming. For an instant, he felt what she felt. The deep ache of always being different, the longing for connection, the fierce independence that was both strength and shield. And she felt him in return. His years of uncertainty, his determination to be useful despite being unwanted, his careful kindness toward others who were also alone. Most importantly, she felt his genuine interest in her, not as a creature to be controlled or a challenge to be overcome, but as an individual worthy of respect and friendship. The bond that formed between them wasn't dramatic or flashy. There were no light shows or mystical energies. Just a quiet recognition that spread through both their minds like dawn breaking over a long night. They were no longer alone. Remarkable, Dr. Collins breathed, her instruments registering changes neither she nor Marcus fully understood. The quantum resonance has stabilized into perfect harmony. I've never seen anything like it. Ambassador Richardson looked stunned. That's it? That's the great demonstration of humanity's contribution to galactic civilization? You still don't understand, Elder Thanevar said, but his tone was patient rather than condescending. What you have just witnessed is the rarest event in our recorded history. A voluntary bond formed across species barriers with a creature that has never shown interest in any form of cooperation or alliance. Another council member spoke up. In 10,000 years, exactly 3 beings have successfully bonded with shadow worms. One was a legendary draconian warrior poet whose deeds are still sung today. Another was a crystalline entity from the far rim whose species has since transcended physical form entirely. And the third, General Morrison asked, stands before us now, Elder Thanevar replied simply. Marcus felt Nyxaria's amusement through their new connection. She was pleased by the other's astonishment, but not particularly impressed by it. From her perspective, the bond was simply recognition of an obvious truth. They belonged together because neither of them had ever belonged anywhere else. What happens now? Marcus asked. Now, Elder Thanevar said, humanity is formally invited to join the Galactic Council, not as junior members working to prove themselves, but as full partners bringing a unique and valuable perspective to our collective future. The Elder's gaze encompassed the entire human delegation. Your species will face challenges in the years ahead. There will be those who question your rapid advancement, who test your resolve, who attempt to exploit what they see as weakness in your cooperative nature. And when that happens, another council member added, you will have allies who understand the true strength that comes from chosen bonds rather than imposed hierarchy. Marcus felt a surge of something he'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that he belonged somewhere, that his differences made him valuable rather than burdensome. Through his bond with Nyxaria, he could sense her own amazement at the feeling. Neither of them had ever imagined that being outsiders might be exactly what qualified them to bridge the gaps between worlds. There's just one thing I don't understand, Marcus said. Why me specifically? There must be other humans who could have formed this bond. Elder Thanevar exchanged glances with his fellow council members before answering. Perhaps. But we needed someone who understood isolation without becoming bitter. Someone who had learned to see beyond surface differences. Someone who could recognize worth in the overlooked and forgotten. The Elder's ancient eyes held warmth that transcended species barriers. We needed someone whose first instinct, when faced with something alien and potentially dangerous, would be to offer friendship rather than demand submission. Marcus looked down at Nyxaria, who had settled beside him with the easy comfort of someone who had finally found their place in the universe. Through their bond, he could feel her contentment, her quiet joy at no longer being alone. I guess being an orphan prepared me for this after all, he said with a smile that felt more genuine than any he'd ever worn. The formal acceptance ceremony was held 3 days later in the Great Assembly Hall, a structure that defied every law of physics Marcus thought he understood. The building existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, allowing representatives from hundreds of species to attend, without the space constraints that should have made such a gathering impossible. Marcus stood with the human delegation on a platform that floated serenely above an audience that included beings he couldn't have imagined in his wildest dreams. There were the crystalline entities from the far rim, their forms shifting between solid matter and pure energy. Aquatic species attended through environmental suits filled with exotic atmospheres. Some representatives appeared to be sentient mathematical equations given physical form. Nyx Area perched beside him, her presence both calming and empowering. Over the past 3 days, their bond had deepened beyond simple communication. They could share emotions, memories, even thoughts when they concentrated. Marcus had experienced the freedom of flight through her memories, while she had gained an understanding of human concepts like adoption and chosen family that fascinated her endlessly. "I still can't believe this is happening," Dr. Collins murmured, recording everything she could with instruments that barely functioned in the assembly hall's multidimensional space. Ambassador Richardson had spent the 3 days alternating between elation and anxiety. His formal training hadn't prepared him for a situation where a teenage orphan had become humanity's most important representative. To his credit, he'd adapted with remarkable grace. "Just remember," he told Marcus quietly, "every species here will be watching how you handle yourself. You're not just representing humanity anymore. You're representing the possibility of change for the entire council." Elder Thainvar's voice echoed through the impossible space, somehow reaching every being present regardless of their location or sensory configuration. "We gathered today to welcome humanity to the Galactic Council, and to acknowledge a new chapter in our collective evolution." The ceremony began with formal presentations from various council species, each explaining how they had initially qualified for membership. The stories were remarkably similar, demonstrations of military might, technological superiority, or resource control. Each species had proven they could dominate their local region of space before being invited to join the larger community. "And now," Elder Thainvar announced, "we welcome a species that qualifies not through dominance, but through their capacity for connection across all barriers." Marcus felt hundreds of alien eyes focusing on him as he stepped forward. Through his bond with Nyx Area, he could sense her calm confidence flowing into him, steadying his nerves. 3 days ago, he began, his voice somehow carrying to every corner of the vast space. "I was just a foster kid who'd never belonged anywhere. I thought that made me worthless, a burden that people had to tolerate." A ripple of interest passed through the assembly. Many of these species had never encountered the human concept of adoption or foster care. "But I learned something here that changed everything. Being different, being an outsider, being the one who doesn't fit, that's not a weakness. It's a superpower." He gestured to Nyx Area, who spread her wings slightly in acknowledgement. "Nyx Area and I bonded because we both understood isolation. But more than that, we understood what it means to keep looking for connection even when everything tells you to give up." The crystalline entities began to resonate in harmonious frequencies, their version of applause. Other species showed approval in their own ways. Color changes, electromagnetic pulses, quantum fluctuations that Dr. Collins's instruments registered as excitement. "Humanity doesn't just form bonds across our own species," Marcus continued, gaining confidence. "We form families with our former enemies. We adopt children who aren't biologically ours. We make friends with people who are completely different from us. We even form emotional connections with our machines, our vehicles, our tools." Through the assembly, beings began to murmur among themselves in countless languages and communication methods. This was clearly a novel concept for many of them. The Galactic Council has been successful because each member species brought something unique: strength, technology, resources. But what if the next challenges we face can't be solved by any single species, no matter how advanced? Marcus felt Nyx Area's encouragement flowing through their bond as he approached the core of his message. What if we need to work together in ways that have never been tried before? What if we need to understand each other not just as allies but as family? The assembly had grown quiet, with even the most alien beings focusing their attention on this young human and his impossible dragon companion. "Humanity offers the Council something that's been missing," Marcus said. "We offer the ability to see potential family in anyone, no matter how different they seem. We offer the experience of building belonging where none existed before." Elder Thainvar stepped forward, his ancient presence commanding absolute attention. "The human delegation has requested that their formal acceptance speech be given not by their appointed ambassador, but by their youngest member. This choice itself demonstrates the wisdom that makes their species valuable to our community." The elder's gaze swept across the entire assembly. "For too long we have measured advancement by a species' ability to stand apart, to prove superiority over others. But the universe faces challenges that require us to stand together, not just as allies of convenience, but as chosen family across all boundaries. A being that looked like a living constellation pulsed with increased brightness, which Dr. Collins quietly identified as enthusiastic agreement. Several aquatic species released streams of bioluminescent particles that painted patterns of approval in their environmental suits. Therefore, Elder Thainvar announced, humanity is not merely accepted into the Galactic Council. They are welcomed as the first species to join under our new Charter of Connection, which recognizes that the greatest strength comes not from standing above others, but from standing with them. The celebration that followed was unlike anything in the Council's recorded history. Instead of formal ceremonies demonstrating each species' achievements, it became an exchange of culture, art, and philosophy. Beings that had been formal allies for millennia began to interact as something approaching friends. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, not because he was the most important person there, but because his bond with Nyxaria had become a symbol of what was possible when barriers were allowed to fall. As the ceremony concluded, Zarath approached him with obvious excitement. "Your species continues to surprise us," she said. "In 3 days you have accomplished what some thought would take generations." "We had a good teacher," Marcus replied, gently stroking Nyxaria's neck. Through their bond, he felt her amusement at being called a teacher, though she was pleased by the recognition. "What happens now?" Dr. Collins asked. "Do we return to Earth to prepare for integration?" Elder Thainvar overheard the question and approached their group. "That choice is yours to make. But we would propose something different. A new program where young beings from all council species spend time learning from each other, forming the connections that will shape our collective future." The elder looked directly at Marcus. "You would be the first human ambassador to this program, and Nyxaria would be the first shadowworm to serve as a cultural bridge between species." Marcus felt his heart race with possibility. Through their bond, he sensed Nyxaria's eager anticipation. Neither of them had ever had the chance to build something entirely new, to create a place where others like them might find belonging. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "We'd be honored to help build that bridge." 2 years later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the Harmony Station, watching ships from dozens of species dock at the massive orbital facility. The station had been built specifically for the Cultural Bridge program, designed as neutral ground where young beings from across the galaxy could learn from each other without the political pressures of their homeworlds. Nyxaria stretched beside him, her wings now fully mature and marked with the intricate silver patterns that indicated her role as a cultural ambassador. She had grown in the past 2 years, not just physically, but in confidence and purpose. Through their bond, Marcus could feel her contentment at watching the arrivals. Each new ship brought beings who might discover the same sense of belonging they had found. Together, the Arctanian delegation just sent word they're approaching, announced Lieutenant Sarah Park, one of the human officers assigned to the station. The military had initially been skeptical of assigning resources to what they saw as an elaborate cultural exchange program, but the strategic benefits had quickly become apparent. Species that had been suspicious of each other for centuries were forming genuine partnerships. "Any special considerations for their arrival?" Marcus asked, reviewing the files on his tablet. The Arcturians were a silicon-based species that communicated primarily through electromagnetic pulses. This would be their first time participating in the program. "They've requested minimal lighting in their quarters, Doug," Park replied, "and they'll need electromagnetic dampeners during group activities so they don't accidentally interfere with other species' electronics." Marcus nodded, making notes. These logistical challenges had become routine over the past 2 years, but each new species brought unique requirements that tested their growing expertise in interspecies accommodation. Through the viewport, he could see the Earth transport approaching, carrying 12 young humans selected for this cycle of the program. Among them was Maria Santos, a former street kid from São Paulo who reminded him strongly of his younger self. She had that same defensive wariness he'd carried for years, the look of someone who expected to be disappointed but couldn't quite stop hoping. "Are you nervous about the new arrivals?" Zarath asked, joining them at the viewport. She now served as the draconian liaison to the program, having discovered a talent for helping young beings from different species find common ground. "Always," Marcus admitted. "Every group is different. Some adapt quickly, Others take months to let their guard down. Nyxaria made a soft sound that he'd learned to interpret as gentle amusement. Through their bond, she reminded him of his own arrival on Paraxis, how overwhelmed and out of place he'd felt, how certain he'd been that he didn't belong there. But that's what makes it work, he continued. Everyone here knows what it feels like to be the outsider, to not fit in with their own species' expectations. That shared experience creates connections that wouldn't be possible otherwise. The docking bay announcer chimed, indicating the Earth transport had successfully locked into position. Marcus and his team made their way down to greet the new arrivals. Following protocols they'd refined through dozens of previous orientations. The 12 humans who emerged from the transport were a diverse group, different ages, backgrounds, and reasons for being selected. Some looked excited, others apprehensive. Maria Santos emerged last, carrying a single worn backpack and wearing the expression of someone prepared to be rejected at any moment. "Welcome to Harmony Station," Marcus addressed the group. "I know this is overwhelming. 3 years ago I was standing where you are now, convinced I didn't belong anywhere in the galaxy, let alone here." He gestured to Nyxaria, who had positioned herself where the new arrivals could see her clearly. "This is my partner, Nyxaria. She's a shadow worm, which means she's never belonged to traditional draconian society. We found each other because we both understood what it meant to be alone." One of the younger humans, a boy who couldn't be more than 15, raised his hand tentatively. "Is it true that you can talk to her telepathically?" "Not exactly telepathically," Marcus explained. "We share emotions, sensations, sometimes memories. It's more like having a best friend who always understands what you're feeling, even when you can't explain it yourself." Through their bond, he felt Nyxaria's warm approval of that description. Over the next 6 months, Zareth continued the orientation. "You'll be living and learning alongside beings from 47 different species. Some will seem familiar, others will challenge everything you think you know about life and intelligence. The goal isn't to change who you are," Marcus added. "It's to discover that who you are might be exactly what someone else needs to understand their own place in the universe." As they gave the tour of the station, Marcus watched Maria Santos carefully. She hung back from the group, observing everything with sharp intelligence but maintaining careful distance. When they reached the common areas where current program participants were gathered, her expression shifted to something approaching wonder. The common area was a carefully controlled chaos of interspecies interaction. A group of crystalline entities were teaching geometric harmonies to several young draconians and a pair of methane-breathing titanians. Near the observation windows, human teens were engaged in what appeared to be a heated but friendly debate, with a collection of beings that looked like mobile plants. "It's not what I expected," Maria said quietly, speaking for the first time since the transport had docked. "What did you expect?" Marcus asked gently. "Everyone trying to prove they were better than everyone else, I guess. Competition, politics." She gestured toward the mixed groups. "This looks like fun." "It is fun," confirmed Carlos Martinez, a human participant from the previous cycle who had volunteered to help with orientations. "Weird fun sometimes. Last week I learned to sing mathematical equations with the harmonics. Turns out I'm pretty good at it." Marcus smiled, remembering his own amazement during those first weeks on Pyraxis. The galaxy was vast and strange, but it was also full of beings who were just trying to find their place in it, same as humans. "There's something else," Zareth told the new arrivals. "The Cultural Bridge program has become more successful than anyone anticipated. Several participating species have formed permanent diplomatic partnerships. Others have started joint scientific projects. Some have even begun adopting each other's children across species lines. You're not just here to learn about other cultures," Marcus explained. "You're here to help build the foundation for a galaxy where being different isn't something to overcome, but something to celebrate." As the orientation concluded and the new arrivals were shown to their quarters, Marcus found himself alone with Nyxaria on the observation deck again. Through their bond, he could feel her satisfaction at watching another group of young beings take their first steps toward connection. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked her. "Being wild, being free from all these responsibilities?" Her response came as a complex mixture of emotions and memories. She missed the simplicity of her former life, but not the loneliness. She had traded absolute freedom for something more valuable: purpose, partnership, and the knowledge that she was helping create something that had never existed before. "I know what you mean," Marcus said softly. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed in the foster system, if I'd never come to Paraxis. Would I have found a family eventually? Would I have made something of my life?" Through the viewport, he could see new ships approaching, bringing more young beings who were ready to discover that the galaxy was much bigger and much more welcoming than they'd ever imagined. But then I think about all the connections we've helped create, all the partnerships that started here, all the young beings who found their place in the universe because someone showed them it was possible. Nyxaria moved closer, her presence warm and reassuring through their bond. She reminded him of something important, that belonging wasn't something you found, but something you created by making space for others who were also searching. Marcus smiled, watching the stars beyond the station's superstructure. He had started as an orphan boy, rejected by everyone who should have wanted him. Now he was helping to build a galaxy where no one would ever have to feel that alone again, and that, he realized, was exactly the family he'd been searching for all along.